Thanks for being here. Today in this podcast, I am going to talk about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth specific to supply chain management and what are the top trends coming up in 2024. We're really coming off the downturn of the COVID economy, and so specifically here in the United States, there was a lot of stimulus impact. There are a lot of checks that went out to the population within the USA. A lot of residents were basically locked inside and couldn't go anywhere and couldn't do anything. So what did they do? They spent their money on consumer goods, and so that had a massive ripple effect throughout the entire global economy. Global supply chain, we couldn't import fast enough all of the goods that US residents were buying, mainly because they were bored at home, and so now we're starting to see, a little bit of that pendulum shift back to where consumers are spending a good amount of their money on all of these consumer goods. That pendulum switched back over the last year or so into experiences. People were traveling more and doing more experiences, but now that pendulum has kind of swung back towards the middle where consumer debt has increased. I think it just crossed, $1 trillion here in the United States. So consumers are pulling back on their spending rightfully. And so what we're seeing is more of a settling into what this new post-COVID economy sort of looks like in the United States, where we're going back to sort of 2018. 2019 levels of purchasing. We're starting to see a bunch of especially over the last year. A lot of retailers were dealing with surplus inventory issues. Now those have since balanced out a little bit. And so now we're coming up into the holiday season, and it's really a wait and see game with a lot of what the consumers want to do, and the retailers are going to essentially react to what the consumers want. So they don't have these massive, warehouse space filled with inventories. I mean, even last Christmas season, we were still selling goods that were on container ships that were stuck out of the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, that were stuck on those ships for 8-9 months. And so a lot of those Halloween decorations, those Christmas decorations that were stuck out on the boats in 2021, that inventory was sold off in 2022. And so this has really been the first holiday season where we're going to find out where the true economy is at from a US perspective, and then how the rest of the world is going to react as far as spending as well. I think there's a greater fear of recessionary conditions across the entire globe, and so it's kind of a wait and see approach both on the consumer side and on the retailer side, and that really is what drives a lot of shipments, I guess, separate from, some of the more materials, dry bulk, natural gas, crude oil, things like that. Those shipments are treated very separately from consumer spending, and so that's a whole different market. I don't really have the expertise on, dry bulk goods and, crude oil and things like that, but I do know that some geopolitical tensions are affecting those shipments as well. But here the state side, it really is all about the consumer and retailer. Just wait and see. So are retailers in general, and is the supply chain in general struggling less with excess inventory and sort of that lumpiness of the supply chain that we've had in recent years? So they have a lot of the major retailers, so the Walmarts, the Targets, Costco, even of the world, they have that warehouse space now secured, and so they're essentially what they're doing is they're just waiting to see what the consumer is going to do. I mentioned earlier about the consumer debt that has been increasing. What is another factor that will really impact consumer spending is student loan repayments. For those who are viewing internationally, US has a very, a big issue with, student loan payments for their college degrees, for their college education. Those payments were put on hold since COVID, and now with that delay being removed, you're going to have an extra added expense. And so things are getting much more expensive for the US consumer, much more than they traditionally have been, and so you have all of these additional bills that are coming down the pipeline. So we kind of expect to have consumers are going to spend a little bit less this holiday season, but we just don't know yet, because we don't know if they are going to continue to rack up credit card debt, but less likely. So because of all of those external factors that are now going to be playing a role as far as consumer spending is concerned, and then you have on the carrier and the broker side of things, which is the trucking companies and the companies that are trying to arrange the shipments from the customers to the people who are actually making the goods, the manufacturers. So you have those added components of they're also dealing with an enormous amount of fraud that's going on. And so anytime you see, consumer, it's kind of interesting, from a global perspective, when you see the rise in consumer debt, people not having access to a lot of excess funds to be able to go and shop. Then you have a rise in crime, especially cargo crime related activities that are also affecting a lot of brokers, a lot of carriers, and it's becoming the cost of doing business is becoming very expensive. And so you have all of these factors sort of colliding in at once, but the economy is still, especially the US based economy, is still doing relatively okay. There are some media companies, Freight Waves in particular, they have their sonar platform which predicts and analyzes, tender inbound rejection shipments, things like that. They analyze all of that data and they kind of predict that by Q2 of 2024 that we're essentially going to be out of any kind of recession. There are some experts that think that we're going to be done with any kind of a recession fears by the summer, but spring to summertime is looking like when we're going to kind of be back to those pre-pandemic levels and the recession concerns are going to be over. So hopefully that leads to consumer confidence increasing and then retailers' confidence increasing, and then that has a ripple effect throughout all of shipping. Whether it's the big cargo ships that you see out in the ocean or if it's the down to the trucks to the Amazon delivery packages that you're getting on your doorstep. All of that has a ripple effect. That's an interesting prediction for next year and when things might start to settle down a bit. So other trends developing then for 2024 and beyond. AI is the center for all those trends and dominating, I think, for global transportation as a whole. So to put things in perspective for the audience there, the supply chain industry as a whole has been really slow to adopt new technology. They made major investments in the 90s and the mid-90s, early 2000s into what's called these massive transportation management software, warehouse management software, a fleet management software. They made all of those investments in the 90s, and what happens is, with a lot of those different platforms, they're big all-in-one platforms designed to handle everything, all of your data from accounting to tracking loads to getting your products from point A to B. Rate negotiations, all of those things were happening in one platform. Now you can imagine that is so much data, it is so much to filter through, and so for a lot of the smarter companies have started to implement different machine learning technologies. They're implementing those into their already established tech decks. Now what we're seeing, especially that started this year, is that some of those systems that were developed in the late 90s, the early 2000s, they're becoming a little clunky. They're becoming a little, abrasive to further integrations, outside integrations with different other technology providers. Some of them are doing a good job of incorporating those different technologies into those massive tech stacks. But it's really started to happen over the last year where you're starting to get these niche players who focus on one thing: driver tracking, truck parking, maritime shipping, the amount of time that you're waiting off of the coast in order to, get your call into the port in order to be unloaded, measuring fuel from point A to B, how much speed you should be doing on the highway, how much of your speed you should be doing on the ocean. All of these different niche technology players are now starting to come into the fold and they're starting to be integrated into these bigger systems. And so I think a major trend for 2024 is going to be the further adoption of AI, trying to filter through all of those different data points to help save their customers money, to help save themselves. The logistics providers help them save some money anywhere they can. Because just to give you a perspective, any good that you have, any kind of goods that you have in your house, building materials, things like that, up to 50% of that product's goods are transportation related costs. So any small savings that you can make on any part of the transportation process has a massive ripple effect. And so I think that we're going to see more AI adoption, we're going to see more machine learning, and we're going to see more of these niche players and hopefully break down some of these technological silos that exist within all throughout supply chain, where you don't have just intermodal out on an island by themselves. You don't have maritime out on an island by themselves. You don't have trucking or even the variety of different trucks that are being used. You don't have all of these different silos. They can play together and integrate much more, and I think we're going to see much more of that, not just in 2024 but in 2023 as well. These are when companies are starting to make those investments and make their budgets is right now. AI is not a buzzword. I think it's going to be absolutely crucial, not just to at the top company line level, but down to the workers that are in the trenches. AI can really help a lot of those different processes and decision making that is going on from the top down to the bottom. We are seeing massive adoption happening from the accounting perspective. We're also seeing it from the sales and marketing perspective. I think that's where the bigger use cases are right now. There are other transportation companies. I'll use one for example, that they are taking the weather data that's available to anyone in the United States, or really anyone globally. You can take that weather data and overlay it on top of the shipments that you already have within your system. And now the brokers who are sitting at the phones and they're calling the truck drivers, they're calling their customers, they're trying to get these shipments moved from point A to B. They can now see those weather patterns days in advance so they can plan their equipment around that. So say like a major hurricane is going to be coming through, say the southeastern port of the United States, you likely do not want your shipments or your trucks or your equipment in those areas that are going to be heavily impacted unless you're going to be staging them for recovery relief. So there's lots of different use cases of how AI, where you could take that broker, that person that's sitting at the phone making those decisions, is now able to take big pieces of that decision making process and use AI as a filter on top of those decision making, really high impact, revenue impacting decisions They're using these different tools and these different ways to sort through massive amounts of data, and that's really what AI is, taking all of your data and making it actionable. And I think that's where a lot of folks, when they hear maybe is AI a buzzword, or maybe is AI just a fad. AI has been around for a while, but in the sense of what we were talking about with AI today, it's essentially taking large data set of things already within your organization, and then figuring out how you can use intelligence and your employees to use that data to make decisions faster. So it's one of those things that is going to make the entire role evolve, where you're using AI as almost like a co-pilot in your day-to-day work. So it's not just a platform, you're going to go to like ai.com and buy the tool and then implement it into your systems. It's going to be a core part of every part of your job to help you make decisions faster. So I think from that perspective, we are only scratching the surface when it comes to transportation data, because when you think of transportation data and just global logistics supply chain, it really tells the story of consumer behavior all over the globe. What people are purchasing, what people are buying tells us about what their future investments are going to be, and as we simply just can't sort through all of that data by ourselves, we do need the help from these other technology players in order to make those decisions faster. But it also matters if you have good data, because if you have bad data, you're not going to be able to make those decisions that are going to help your customers get their products delivered from source to port much more quickly and much more efficiently, which is what every customer, every manufacturer wants in the world is. They want cheaper transportation costs, and that's really going to be the only way to increase productivity from a logistics provider perspective. That's super interesting. It's almost like there's an integration or coming together of different types of technology. Here you've got AI, Internet of Things, predictive analytics, just data management, all this stuff that's sort of been buzzing around in the background for a while now. It seems like it's sort of a perfect storm of opportunity now with technology, with all these different emerging techs, especially with AI. AI is sort of like the capstone that sort of takes all that other stuff and now makes it possible to make smarter decisions and not just have the data, but now figure out what you're going to do with it and make better decisions. Another interesting point to mention, there's an underlying current that has happened within, I would say, the past 5 years, where what's called these digital freight brokerages have tried to implement technology into a system that is mostly relationship based. So for a lot of folks, if I guess maybe understand the intricacies of the US freight market, the US freight market is, I imagine this works all over the globe because relationships matter, and so for a lot of these folks, they have a direct relationship with the customer that's arranging the shipments. Now these customers have had a whirlwind of 3 years of nobody even knowing what a supply chain manager role was. They were not invited into the C-suite, they were not invited into budget planning or things like that, and they should have been, supply chain manager should have had a seat at the table, because transportation costs affect the product and good cost so much, up to 50% like I just said, and so for a lot of these companies, they have avoided that issue and that role of a supply chain manager. Now the supply chain manager at a lot of companies has a seat at the C-suite table. They're in the weekly meetings and they're talking about the increased role and their increased productivity, or trying to get to an increased productivity within their role. But these are people who are handling tons and tons of brokers and shipments and relationships, and they really just are frankly tired there. It's essentially, one very small teams, 1 to 5 people that are in charge of supply chain for global companies, so they're overworked, but they also want to focus on their go-to relationships. So supply chain is very much and always will be a very people-first business, but they are getting pressure from the top, from their investors, from partner companies, that they need to start making these tech investments, and so that's where the tech investments are almost being pushed off to not the smaller players, but the people lower in. So you have the supply chain manager, you have the logistics service providers, you have your warehouse operators, you have your procurement directors, you have all of these people that are now responsible for all of these different factors, and so you have to think about it from the lens of what technology is going to help that small supply chain manager team be able to work more effectively, be able to be more productive. And a lot of those folks are scared to make those large tech investments right now because of the fact that a lot of these companies have focused on the digital side of things, the digital movement of goods. They kind of forgot a little bit about the relationship aspect that you have to build between customer and broker and shipper and driver. All of these relationships matter, and so for a lot of these, digital freight brokerages, for example, a lot of them focused on, we're going to remove the person, we're going to remove the truck driver, we're going to remove these people that From the decision-making process and just digitally match a customer to a truck. What's been lost over the last 5 years and what companies are starting to realize is that you need both. You need the tech advancement, you need the tech integrations, but you also cannot remove the human from the equation. And so there's a lot of companies that are struggling right now on how do we make tech investments without removing the human. Because we've already been burned over the last 5 years for making these large tech investments and that hasn't resulted in ROI. So now it's at the pendulum we kind of talked earlier about the pendulum swinging. Pendulum is swinging back to the folks who focus on relationships and that they can build out customized transportation solutions for these different customers based on their specific needs. And that's where technology can come into play to help develop those custom solutions where the person and the people are still at the forefront of making those business decisions. So then that way the people who are working in the trenches, who are often forgotten about, those are the people that are actually using the software. Those are the people that are actually using these different tech integrations and trying to find where else they can make those slight improvements from not having to make 40 calls a day or 100 calls a day in order to see where freight is. So now they're trying to figure out what does that balance look like. And so I think for a lot of companies, especially in supply chain, they've been burned a little bit in the past and now they're trying to figure out, okay, where do we make the investments from a technology perspective that we can get these incremental improvements from a productivity perspective and then still really focus on the people side of things, which I think has been largely forgotten mostly because we've all been running around like chickens with our heads cut off over the last few years, and now things are starting to kind of settle into what we think is the new normal. And that's where companies can now catch their breath. Supply chain managers can catch their breath and everybody that works underneath them could kind of have a way to say, okay, what did we learn? Where can we make these investments? And where are we not going to waste a lot of time and energy? Because I don't have to explain this to you a lot of these companies, it's a senior VP that maybe makes a fly-by-night decision where that software sounds great, we're going to use it, and then they never talk to the people who actually use the software. They never talk to the people that it actually directly affects. And so I think that that's where it's almost like very much coming back to reality for a lot of these companies, is that you probably overinvestment of your job will then help the people relationship side of things to help make decisions faster so they can focus on the things that best at. And that it's an interesting perspective because we are talking about not only changing technologies or leveraging technology in a different way, but it's also a cultural mindset shift, I would imagine, to where it's affecting, us as humans in supply chain management. There is obviously with any kind of new technology, there's a little bit of apprehension. However, smart ones are adopting it. I would say a lot of apprehension depending on the segment that you ask. Truck drivers in particular are very apprehensive to new technology. They are arguably I would imagine, the mode of transportation and logistics that the most impacted by technology. They have autonomous trucks, the promise of removing the driver, sort of promise to them. And so it's become a career that they've almost had to fight back against technology coming more and more into the truck. Autonomous trucks probably doesn't look like it's going to be a thing that's going to be a long-term solution, especially for long-haul freight. There's a lot of debate that's going on around that sector, but then from the truckers' perspective, they have ELD mandates, these electronic log devices that have been installed in every one of their trucks monitoring, how far they're driving, their speed they're going, that basically outfitting a semi-truck with all of these electrical components that makes the job of driving a truck. It's supposed to, for a lot of drivers, that their sentiment is, I can drive my truck better than this tool can tell me how to drive it. Now there's even more technology that's starting to come in with cameras that are inside the truck that are facing them, and you have to think about it from the lens of the driver, that a lot of times these are their homes. This is where they're sleeping and where they're undressing and where they're eating and where they're, enjoying their off time in. And so for a lot of drivers, they're very hesitant to adopt this new technology, whereas the office workers, it's almost very much the same kind of apprehension to adopting technology because they see it as, this is going to take my job. And we also see it in warehouse workers as well, with the adoption of more robotics, more automation coming into the warehouse. There are actual companies that have to train their employees to see the robot as a helper from a psychological perspective. They have to introduce this kind of training to say you have to see this robot as a helper, not something that's going to take your job. And so there's this psychological component with adopting more technology into the fields, into various different silos within the entire supply chain. But then you have some of the people who are taking these tools. They are taking ChatGPT and I guess Bard to an extent, but Bard is kind of an afterthought, I think, for most folks who use these large language model type tools. What we're starting to see more, especially at the enterprise level for a lot of logistics companies, is that they are adopting their own personal LLM large language models to learn off of their own data sets for fears that their data could, privacy concerns, things like that, with using some of these open source models and some of these other, Microsoft powered models, things like that. So you kind of have an apprehension. I've seen it with a lot of marketers and sales folks as well, much less so on the sales side of things. It's much more on the marketing side of things. They really fear that their jobs are going to be taken. The way I see it is that these jobs are evolving and that, using these tools, you're going to be able to increase your productivity so much more, so much faster, because you're able to sift through data so much more quickly. Everything is recorded. Conversations like this are recorded. Meetings are recorded. You can't possibly filter through all of that data and be able to learn something from it to turn it into something actionable. And so that's why I say the smart ones are starting to use these tools in every aspect of their work, from email to quoting to, RFPs, to customer communications, to reducing the amount of phone calls that someone has to make to the shipper, to the broker. And so we're having a lot of these tech advancements, but they very much is that other side that is very resistant to it. I would say drivers are the most resistant to it, but rightfully so. Where it's going to impact more along the lines of supply chain is going to be those in-office workers, the accounting, the marketing, the sales teams, and also the folks that are doing a lot of pricing, a lot of quoting different trade lanes all throughout the globe. What do those rates look like? Who's the carrier? There's all of these different data points. Whether it's another one, geopolitical issues, all of these different data points have to be pulled into consideration. And it would be impossible to make educated guesses or educated decisions if you're not working with those different data sets and using technology on top of those data sets, especially when you talk about the disparate data sets, the stuff that's not internal. It's not data that you've accumulated or hoarded over decades in your own internal systems. This is, the geopolitical stuff, weather-related stuff, economic data, all that stuff is third-party that you've got to figure out a way to tie it all together with the internal stuff that you have. And a lot of these folks, they don't have the conversations with those workers, with the brokers that are making 100 phone calls a day, or the drivers that are driving hundreds of miles a day. They aren't being consulted first for a lot of these tech investments. And so when it comes down the pipeline, hey, you got to start using this tool, they don't want to use it. And then they figure out really quickly, oh, we just wasted a very large chunk of money on this investment because we didn't actually talk to the people who are going to be using the tool. So that is, it sounds like such an easy thing, but I think for the last, handful of years, a lot of folks within supply chain have been, it's almost like shiny object syndrome, where they see the new tech tools and they want to just go ahead and just buy them without realizing how it's going to fit into their already established processes, and then also from the lens of the workers who are actually going to use it. So that's why, I say right now is that there's a little bit of apprehension to invest in technology solutions unless you can prove that you can provide an ROI or solve a very specific problem, which sort of brings it back to where a lot of the niche players, where they're going to play a really strong role, that, a large aspect of what's going on in this industry right now is fraud and prevention of fraud, cargo crimes, things, smuggling across borders, smuggling into different ports. A lot of these things are, there it's on an uptick, and so you're starting to see more. And that has a direct impact on bottom line in ROI, is that a lot of these companies are starting to invest in tracking software, and then it goes back to the drivers. The drivers want to be tracked. There's different elements with where you're shipping goods. For example, in Mexico, they are only allowed to drive during the day. They're not allowed to drive at night, because that's where their statistics are showing them that a majority of cargo crime is happening is at night. So when they do drive on the road, they drive during the day and they do not stop. So a lot of these different factors, a lot of these different data points are they should be impacting your decisions. But what are those niche players? What are they all? What kind of solutions are they offering for the problems that exist right now that is directly impacting revenue? Fraud and cargo crime is a huge one, especially stateside, and I would imagine across the globe, but that is one that is a more investment is starting to come into that mix, and more of a stronger focus on trying to prevent these issues. Because we talk about all of just the general normal supply chain issues, but then you layer in the fact of cargo crime on top of it. And that it directly impacts pricing, it directly impacts consumer spending, the costs of goods, it impacts a lot. So that's a big factor of what's going on in supply chain right now that is trying to be combed with technology and with different insurance solutions, tracking things like that. But are the drivers going to use it? Are the brokers going to use it? That still remains to be seen. What worries most when it relates to supply chain management, some of these trends you're talking about, I would say definitely it's almost a sentiment of don't rock the boat right now, where they have, we kind of talked about, the tech investments that they've made over the last 5 years didn't really come to fruition, hasn't really had a strong ROI. And so for a lot of folks, and especially anecdotally, what I'm seeing is that for a lot of these businesses, it's a wait and see approach. It's a wait and see on how the consumers are going to be spending, how retailers are going to respond to that spending if spending happens at all. And then from the investment side of things, margins are so thin right now. There was a huge boom during COVID where people were buying stuff like crazy and shipments, and I think pallets went from like a $100 a piece to $2,000 a piece. And so a lot of these fluctuations that were massive pendulum shifts in the economy have started to settle back in, and so I think there is almost a desperation to find out what is the new normal, what does that look like. So there's a hesitancy to make those big investments right now, and then to have kind of a wait and see approach on where they want to move those chess pieces on their chessboard. And so I think for a lot of these folks, they don't want to make the wrong investment, because the wrong investment could dramatically impact the bottom line. And when margins are already thin, that wrong investment could lead to a lot of people getting laid off. And so I think for a lot of folks, it very much as a wait and see approach, don't rock the boat. I think it's a reality for a lot of software providers that are especially ones that were the venture capital funds. They want to see an ROI, they want to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And for a lot of these technology solutions that haven't come to fruition, a lot of those companies are laying people off, and a lot of those that funding is drying up. It's not so easy to get access to this funding to continue building up a business to gain market share. Now it's all about profitability, and I mean for a lot of small business owners, especially medium-sized business owners, that should be like at the moment that yes, your business has to make money. And so for I think a lot of these software providers are really starting to have their come to Jesus moment, where it's like you got to make some tough decisions. You have to figure out that path to profitability, and what that looks like. You have to communicate that to your funding partner, and then from the funding partner perspective, they don't really have a lot of patience, and so they want to see that ROI. And if they don't see it, then you're going to be forced to unfortunately make, a lot of layoffs. A lot of freight tech companies in our space have dramatically laid off a lot of their staff. Hundreds of people just in the last month have been laid off from a lot of these more tech-focused freight tech companies. And so far, and it's not just tech companies, but also the brokerages that invested in a lot of those technology solutions, thinking that technology was going to solve all of their problems, and they forgot the people aspect. They forgot that, it's not going to be this sort of a Scrooge McDuck situation where you're just going to dive in a pile of money every single year that COVID spending habits are over, and now you have to be a real business. You have to be profitable. You can't really wait any longer, or otherwise a lot of people are going to suffer. And so you have to right the ship, and you have to do it now. And that's where a lot of companies are starting to set themselves up for that 2024. Hopefully success is by trimming the fat now. And unfortunately, it's a crude way of, saying that when it comes to, employee jobs and things like that, because ultimately they're the ones that burned or get the brunt end of it when upper management makes, bad decisions and bad investment decisions. But that's the thing with the supply chain, is that it's always evolving. It's one that's always going to be invested in. And so the thing with, supply chain roles is that unfortunately, if you are laid off in one area, then there's probably several other areas that you could make the leap and make the jump career-wise. And from an AI perspective, if you are not focused, if you are one of those folks that were laid off, and you're not focusing on just AI operations as a whole, I feel like that is one area that is a glaring mistake. But it also could be a great opportunity, because that's what every single one of these companies are wanting to do right now. They're wanting to be more productive, and they want to cut costs, and AI can help in both of those areas. And so for a lot of those folks, a lot of these software companies that built up, they had really high body counts inside their offices. A lot of these brokerages as well. Now it's about who can rise to the top, who can use these solutions in order to be more productive and to enhance their career, but also enhance the bottom line of a lot of these companies, because that's really the only solution I see right now for a lot of these tech companies that are forced to really look at the bottom line and look at their revenue, look at their P&Ls, and see where they stand. And you got to make smart decisions. You got to get leaner. And that's where I think, for a lot of folks, it's the process mapping the software investments and how you're going to put AI and automation where it makes sense, that the people can still be at the forefront of those, building those relationships, and then use this as almost like their superpower that nobody else sees. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.